New twist to an urban redevelopment plan in To Kwa Wan. And more violence in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Good evening. Financial Secretary Paul Chan says the government is set to announce tax reforms that would reduce the burden on small and medium-sized enterprises in Hong Kong. Under the new two-tier profits tax system pledged by Chief Executive Carrie Lam in her election manifesto, the government would lose around $5 billion in revenue. Small and medium-sized enterprises and start-ups in Hong Kong can look forward to more tax incentives as Carrie Lam pushes ahead with her new tax philosophy. Her finance chief today revealed that his team had completed a draft proposal on a two-tier profits tax system, under which the tax rate for the first $2 million of profits will be lowered from the current 16.5% rate to 10%. Chan plans to present the proposal to his boss in the next couple of weeks.
In itself, it is not a really very complicated tax provision. So it seems to me it won't complicate the current tax system. We have studied several schemes and find this proposal workable. But it requires amendments to the Inland Revenue Ordinance. So subject to the announcement by the Chief Executive at an appropriate time, we will bring the proposed legislation to the Legislative Council for scrutiny.
He added that the government's coffers will incur a $5 billion cut in tax revenues once the new tax regime is in place. But he stressed the government wants to help SMEs develop, expand and upgrade, so they would employ more staff, which would in turn contribute to the economy as a whole. The finance chief also reiterated that real estate prices have been rising for 15 consecutive months to historical highs, so it's not the right time to ease the government's property cooling measures.
The government is seeking immediate custodial sentences for 13 activists who were previously ordered by a magistrate to perform community service. All of them were convicted of unlawful assembly in connection with the storming of the Legislative Council building 3 years ago. The prosecution says a jail sentence for them is necessary to deter other would-be protesters. Caleb Long has more.
The incident happened on June 13, 2014, when the 13 defendants stormed the LegCo building. The Finance Committee was holding a meeting back then on the government's Northeast New Territories development plan. All 13 of them, including Raphael Wong of the League of Social Democrats, were found guilty last year of participating in an unlawful assembly. They were ordered to perform community service. The Secretary for Justice believes the sentencing was too light and has demanded a review of the sentences. In its opening statement, the prosecution pointed out that the protesters caused more than $420,000 in damage. It also said the LegCo building is an important symbol of the rule of law, so the storming of the building amounted to an open challenge of the law. It added that as the offense of taking part in an unlawful assembly carries a maximum jail term of 5 years, the court should hand down a punishment on the middle to higher end of the punishment scale to send out a clear message. Meanwhile, Raphael Wong spoke in his own defense. He said he only wanted to enter the building at that time. He has no intention to use violence or hurt anyone. The lawyer who represents 8 of the defendants said the magistrate already mentioned in his sentencing that the defendants had not acted out of personal interest. This showed the magistrate had fully considered the different aspects of the case with no apparent mistakes, the defense counsel said. The court said it will only consider the action of the defendants and will not judge on their noble ideas. The hearing was adjourned until next Tuesday. The remaining 3 defendants will finish their statements then. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Some residents in To Kwa Wan are worried that plans to transform their neighbourhood may drag on further. It has emerged that a private developer is competing with the Urban Renewal Authority to secure buildings for redevelopment by offering residents higher prices. Elmi Leung has the story.
This neighborhood in To Kwa Wan is dotted with buildings that are more than 50 years old. It's due to get a makeover if the Urban Renewal Authority manages to secure the rights to develop it. Just last month, the statutory body offered flat owners on Bailey Street and Wing Kong Street close to $15,400 per square foot, its highest ever price offered so far. Still, that's lower than what one private developer is willing to pay. This chairman of One Owners Corporation said the Richfield Group offered to pay $400,000 on top of the URA's package. But that's a concern. He fears redevelopment will only drag on if different parties compete against each other to snap up flats. Private developer Richfield Group did not confirm if it's offering higher prices to purchase flats. As for the URA, it acquired 45% of rights from owners at that To Kwa Wan project as of last Friday, though that's still short of at least 80% ownership required to trigger a compulsory sale of the entire building for redevelopment purposes under current laws. In other words, redevelopment plans could get to a standstill if another party holds more than 20% ownership of a block. URA's non-executive director Lawrence Poon thinks the threshold for compulsory sale can be lowered further to speed up redevelopment. Elmi Long, TVB News.
Chinese state media has warned that US President Donald Trump's plan to order a probe into supposedly unfair Chinese trade practices will poison relations between the two countries. This comes as Trump is set to issue an order shortly to determine whether to investigate certain trade practices that are deemed to harm American interests. Jeff Tang has the story.
Opening an investigation on supposedly unfair Chinese trade practices is a rash decision that US President Donald Trump will regret. That was the stern warning from Beijing's official newspaper, China Daily, as Trump was set to order US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer to determine if such a probe was warranted. The move, which could lead to steep tariffs on Chinese goods, was seen by many as a pressure tactic from the business mogul turned politician to force Beijing to help crack down on North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. China Daily slammed Trump's transactional approach to foreign affairs, saying that his politicizing of trade will only worsen America's economic woes and poison Sino-US ties. Trump himself had said that he would be more lenient on Beijing if it was more aggressive in reining in its rogue neighbor. That's despite claims to the contrary from unnamed White House officials. They insisted that the trade action was not a pressure tactic and that diplomacy over Pyongyang and the potential trade probe were totally unrelated. Over in the U.S. territory of Guam, officials have no plans to evacuate people, even if Pyongyang makes good on its threat to attack the Pacific island, saying the time frame would be too short.
And again, I repeat, there has been no change in security threat levels. We are defended and we will be protected.
The chances of any missile or missiles getting through, in my calculation, is 0.00001. That's 5 zeros. %.
However, the island's tourism officials said the threat of an imminent attack has yet to hurt visitor numbers. Meanwhile, the chest beating from Washington continued despite their claims to the contrary. The US and Japan held joint live-fire drills, including rocket artillery drills, on the northern island of Hokkaido. That's part of the 18-day Northern Viper exercise that military officials said is unrelated to the escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. Over in Seoul, South Korean defense officials said while its northern neighbor is still 1 to 2 years away from mastering missile re-entry technology, its ability to miniaturize a nuclear warhead is advancing quickly. That comes as the chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, spoke with South Korean Defense Minister Song Yong-moo before meeting the country's president Moon Jae-in. Jeff Tang, TVB News.
More violence erupted in the U.S. state of Virginia when a Unite the Right organizer was attacked at a press conference. This comes one day after an alleged alt-right supporter killed a woman by ploughing into a crowd of people opposing a white supremacist rally. Sonia Artero reports.
The Unite the Right organizer was chased and attacked. That was a scene right after Jason Kessler blamed authorities for not controlling what he called haters at Saturday's dueling rallies.
The hate that you hear around you, that is the anti-white hate that yesterday.
Violence still erupted as police snipers were deployed to respond to Virginia's state of emergency. Kessler said all they were trying to do was to protest against plans to remove a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. But anger is boiling over after 32-year-old Heather Heyer was killed when a car rammed into those protesting against white supremacy. The victim's mother is gutted.
I'm trying to honor my daughter, and the way that I know she would want to be honored, with speaking up for what she believed in, without hate, without anger, without fear.
The FBI and the Justice Department have launched a civil rights investigation into her death. The driver suspected of causing her death and injuring dozens of others is 20-year-old Alex Fields of Ohio. He's now charged with second-degree murder. His former high school teacher insists he idolized Hitler and Nazism.
He thought the Nazis were great and what Hitler did was great.
But all was not great Saturday when the Ku Klux Klan, white nationalists, and neo-Nazis clashed with counter-protesters. Witnesses admit both sides came looking for a fight, and despite one death, the governor says the haters failed.
We're not going to let a small group of people come in here and think they can intimidate us. No, sir. You failed. You have made us stronger today.
Lawmakers complain the president also failed to strongly denounce white nationalism. But while visiting Colombia, the vice president made it clear what the Trump administration will not stand for.
We have no tolerance for hate and violence from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, or the KKK.
Sonia Artero, TVB News.
The flamboyant former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci is claiming that there are elements in Washington which are attempting to undermine U.S. President Donald Trump. Scaramucci was fired after only 11 days on the job for a profanity-laced phone call with a U.S. journalist.
I think that there are elements inside of Washington, also inclusive in the White House, that are not necessarily abetting the president's interests or his agenda. I absolutely believe that, yeah.
Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has warned that Venezuela is on the path to authoritarianism, adding that Washington would not tolerate a dictator in the country. It comes only days after Donald Trump said military action was an option to deal with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. But Pence also said Washington wanted a political solution to the crisis. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence arrived in Colombia for the start of his South American tour, and the political situation in Venezuela was very much on his mind. But Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos was determined to make the point that military action against Venezuela was something that should not be considered. Pence's boss, Donald Trump, made the startling suggestion last week that military intervention was an option to stop President Nicolas Maduro from taking even more power. But the idea has thrown up bad memories of American interventions in Latin America at the height of the Cold War. At a press conference, Pence seemed to indicate Washington is willing to use diplomacy and other peaceful means to resolve the political crisis in Venezuela.
But the president sent me here to continue to marshal the unprecedented support of countries across Latin America to achieve by peaceable means the restoration of democracy in Venezuela, and we believe it is achievable by those means.
Still, Pence also warned his hosts the United States will not accept the emergence of a dictator and said there may be new sanctions against Venezuela. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, the country's intelligence agency director said security forces had captured 18 individuals suspected of participating in the failed assault on a military base a week ago. Gustavo Gonzalez Lopez said on state television that a former National Guard captain was among those captured.
Still ahead in the news. Data indicating an economic slowdown in China. Howard Lamb to abstain from further comments about his alleged abduction. And a wheelchair-friendly 19-seat minibus to serve passengers on Hong Kong Island.
And a warm welcome back to TVB News. China's factory output last month rose at the slowest pace since January this year. Investment and retail sales were also less than expected, reinforcing views that the economy is starting to lose steam. Official data from Beijing showed industrial production rose just 6.4% from the same month a year earlier, a sharp slowdown from June's 7.6%. Economists were expecting growth to ease at 7.2%. The lackluster performance was blamed on higher lending costs and a cooling property market. Despite the weaker-than-expected figures, the nation's manufacturing activity still appeared to be supported by a year-long construction boom. This comes as Beijing continued to pour money into infrastructure projects which drove demand for products ranging from construction equipment and building materials.
Turning overseas again, still refusing to concede defeat, Kenya's opposition leader called for a strike to support his claim to the presidency. Addressing 4,000 cheering supporters, Raila Odinga urged them to skip work to protest vote tampering. He claims the Election Commission rigged the vote to give President Uhuru Kenyatta a second term. He also accuses the ruling party of spilling the blood of innocent victims after 24 people were killed in election-related unrest. As he visited the mother of an 8-year-old girl killed in the slums of Nairobi, police fired tear gas to disperse his followers, who climbed trees and rooftops to catch a glimpse of their hero.
Back locally, Democratic Party member Howard Lam will now keep his mouth shut about the alleged abduction by mainland forces last week. He said he will also detach himself from politics because of fear. Elmi Lung has the story.
Howard Lam has been talk of the town over the past few days. Last Friday, he held a high-profile press conference saying that he was abducted in Mongkok in daylight the day before, made unconscious and tortured with a stapler before being left on a beach. And he suspected mainland agents were behind the incident. Today, he decided to keep his lips sealed.
I don't want the politics again. Yeah, I will stop it, and then I will shut up.
That, he said, was out of fear and concern for his family. The activist denied he had fabricated the story to oppose the government's Express Rail Link co-location plan, which would see mainland laws being enforced at parts of West Kowloon terminus. On 2 radio shows today, the Pan-Democrat questioned if police leaked information to the press, such as details of what he did upon his release, and that he skipped giving a police statement yesterday, which Lam said was due to health reasons.
I'm really unhappy about the police. I think this is trying to discredit me and to create some stories.
This as 22 Pan-Democratic lawmakers push to meet Secretary for Security John Lee to discuss the alleged abduction of Howard Lam. Elmi Long, TVB News.
A new design 19-seater green minibus that provides wheelchair access was unveiled today. Including the wheelchair seat, the minibus will have 20 passengers, but that exceeds the legal maximum of 19. Lawmakers hope the law can be changed to make an exception for the new minibuses of this kind. The vehicle will run on Route 54M from Queen Mary Hospital to the Kennedy Town bus terminus. It's waiting to be approved by the Transport Department and could come into service next month at the earliest. But the operator is concerned that if there are already 19 passengers on board, those in wheelchairs may not be able to get on the bus. All right, you got some sporting news from London first?
I do indeed,
Okay.
yes. Some big names from track and field are saying their last goodbyes. China won a second gold medal on the final day of the World Athletics Championships in London. The event finished up with American Allyson Felix adding to her record haul of medals.